really what you all are here to hear from the experts. I just want to say welcome, everyone. My name is Jess Welser. I am the director of the CIVIC, and I'm so excited for all of you to join us here today for our series, Ask Me Anything, to hear from two incredible leading CSR professionals, really about current trends, the field, how to be a great partner, maybe how to get into this field, and anything else that's on your mind. This really is a time for you to ask all of your questions and get them answered. And so in just a few moments, you'll get to hear from our two fabulous speakers, Katie and Lori, on their background and kind of their story before we kick off for that. So feel free to start putting any questions that you have into the chat now. And just a few virtual housekeeping notes in case you haven't been on a Zoom call in a while. Anything that you have, comments, questions, thoughts, the chat is the great place to use those. And I will message you as well to keep us on track and make sure we don't miss any. You're more than welcome to ask the questions yourself, or I can ask them on your behalf as well. But we will call on you just to ensure keeping that flow going. And we ask that you remain muted unless called upon to ask or share that question. And then if you haven't already turned on the speaker view for today's session, go ahead and hit that in the upper right-hand corner. It'll make it a little great view. And we do also have live captions and recording going as well. So we will be sharing this out along with any resources that are mentioned either in the chat or by your speakers. If you do need technical assistance, please let me know, or Olivia Barrows, our other CIVIC team member, on here. And now I'd like to welcome Katie Dell, Community Outreach Program Manager for RK, and Lori Harder, Senior Global Social Impact Manager of Alteryx, to share more about themselves. So Katie, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I appreciate it very much. I'm excited to, whenever I get to be involved with anything that CIVIC does, I'm always excited to do that. I'm on the board of the organization and have been on the programs committee. So it's been a great resource and a great opportunity to meet more people in this industry. So just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Colorado from a young age, not a native, but very young age. I went to Colorado State, CSU, and then really my first job was in politics. I moved to Washington, D.C., was on the White House staff for a couple of years, and then really got into event planning from there. Had a couple little interim positions between that, but then started doing freelance event planning, and then started doing event planning for civic nonprofits. So I lived in Milwaukee. I worked for the Milwaukee Chamber of Commerce, moved back to Colorado, worked for the Downtown Denver Partnership. I also worked for the Nashville Sports Council, which did community-wide events. So from a nonprofit standpoint, but from a little bit different standpoint of a civic organization. Then I took a few years off when my kids were really young, and then 12 years ago came to work here at RK, which is RK Industries now. The company is started out as only a mechanical contractor, but now there's 7 different business units. Everything from RK Service to water, steel, mission critical. The biggest is still the contracting, the mechanical side. And this is where I was working, and then started our CSR programs and helped do formulate RK Cares, which is our CSR platform and employee engagement, and now manage that, as well as manage 2 foundations for the company. So that's just a little bit of my background, and lived in a couple different states, but back home in Colorado, and I'm happy to be here today.
Cool. Okay, I can go. My name is Lori Harder, and as Jess mentioned, I'm the manager and lead our social impact efforts at Alteryx. And I'm also a part of CIVIC. I'm on the summit committee. And so I think a lot of the stuff that Katie and I will probably talk about will be a little familiar, and hopefully that you heard and went to some of the trainings at the summit. But I lead, as I mentioned, our social impact program at Alteryx. And for those of you who don't know, Alteryx is a data analytics company whose product can be used to accelerate data-driven business outcomes across all lines of business. We have around 2,500 employees in 18 offices, and have been with the company for 3 years. I was born and raised in Oklahoma and went to undergrad at the University of Oklahoma. And then I eventually moved to Denver, Colorado to attend grad school at the University of Denver, where I got my master's in organizational development and leadership development. And my intention was to go into consulting and go into HR. And then I got a job working for actually the city of Golden and was in an HR technician, and realized, oh my goodness, I'm so far removed from employee engagement. And that's where I fell in love with giving back to employees and really establishing cultures within companies. And so from there, I kind of learned what I liked and what I didn't like. And then I got so lucky that Alteryx took a chance on me. So for all of you who are new in your career and want to get into CSR, Alteryx, which is where I work now, is the first company that I've worked in CSR. And I had no experience when I got this role. So I did start my career in the nonprofit space, worked for Children's Hospital Foundation. I interned there when I was in college and worked there before my undergraduate. But I'll give tips and tricks on how I landed my role at Alteryx later. I'm sure that will come up. But what I do now is I started as a specialist. I've been promoted 3 times within the last 3 years. And now I lead our global social impact programs team, which is sustainability, ESG reporting, diversity, equity, and inclusion, volunteering and philanthropy. And then I lead our pro bono program, Tech for Good, humanitarian aid efforts, and then cause marketing. So I'm sure a lot of you can relate that we wear many, many, many hats. So excited to share what I've learned in my 3 years and hopefully hear from you all as well.
Great. What a wonderful way to kick off this program. Thank you both for sharing this great experience. I love hearing truly how you two got into the roles you are, because I know sometimes I don't even get to hear that during all of our conversations on committees and with the board. Well, to kick things off, do you mind sharing some of the current trends in the field that you're seeing today? I know we've seen a lot of changes and experienced a lot in the last few years, but really, where is your role and how are you looking forward to it? And folks, again, please have any questions about the chat. And Katie, you're on mute.
Darn it, I thought I could get through without that once, but sorry about that. So obviously a couple of big trends that are occurring now are DEI and ESG. I think those are the ones that you hear about, the ones that are in the news that people hear about. Maybe they do or don't even understand what ESG means. But I also think the other trend is that having a corporate citizenship program or having businesses knowing that they need to do more and be involved and be good corporate citizens it's now a must-have versus it's a nice to have. So I think there's more opportunities for people in doing CSR and ESG. We don't do a lot of it. The company I work with, we're a private company. So I think in terms of the required reporting, we don't have to do a lot of that. But I just think in general, the focus is there from a lot of different standpoints. And I'm sure Lori could talk a lot more about ESG and DEI since those are under your roles and responsibility.
Yeah, I would definitely echo the ESG and DEI piece. And for those of you that don't know, Alteryx is a publicly traded company. And we just hired our first ESG manager last year. We also just hired our first DEI manager last year. So when it comes to trends, like that is definitely something we felt pressure. Our board put pressure on us, which is great because that means they are paying attention to these trends and they really saw the value in adding these roles to our team. And so I definitely think DEI, there was, I think, a session at the summit around DEI and CSR. And I think those two, there's so much overlap between those areas. And then ESG obviously is within what the reporting out of what we do. So yes, those are two I think ESG is going to continue to grow in this space. And so figuring out your social impact metrics, communicating what those metrics are to your shareholders, to your employees, to everyone, and transparency around that, I think is important. One thing at our company that we've really noticed is crisis comms and just responses to what's happening in the world we felt a lot of pressure. So we have 9 employee resource groups. And one thing that we didn't have until this year is a map and a playbook on how we respond and what issues we respond to. So I think that's something as critical as defining who you are as a company and your values, like what issues you align with, That way you have something you can say to employees when they reach out and ask why you're not responding to this versus this, right? Otherwise, it can get so confusing. So that's one thing we're working on right now. I don't have a solid answer on that. Happy to share once I do. But that's something I think is important. And if you all, oh my gosh, what is the report called? The barometer, oh my gosh, I'm blanking. Edelman
Trust Barometer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One thing that came out of that and that we really paid attention to is employees want CEOs to respond to these. And so that's something we felt too, is our employees are continuously putting pressure on our leadership team to have an opinion on things that are happening. And so that's something too, we've been working with executive comms to coach our executives on how to respond to these issues when they come up at all hands, or when they're writing an email, to make sure it feels empathetic and it's not just like checking a box. So that's something I think that I have seen as a current trend. And then another one is just localizing our efforts. So we're a global company. We no longer can do things, right, that are just US centric. So when we're having meetings, making sure that the timing is inclusive and a good time for our APJ and EMEA associates, making sure that everything is not just in English, our office in Japan translating everything, making sure when we have DEIB trainings, it's not just issues that are happening in the US, and our cause areas are localized. So I think that is something we're also paying a lot of attention to, and we've invested in hiring local program managers to help with those issues as well. So global expansion is something big on our side as well.
That is fabulous. So much to unpack right there. But I'm going to pass it over to Jessica, who has a great question that kind of, I think, really ties in with what we're talking about.
Hi, Katie. Hi, Lori. I was so excited to come today because I know I've had the opportunity to meet both of you, but don't actually know that much about your backgrounds and or your day-to-day work. And so I was really excited to attend. So first off, thank you for having me. I'm just curious, there's been a lot of conversation about a possible recession, and I'm, of course, on the nonprofit side, work for Denver Scholarship Foundation. And a lot of the partners that we've been talking with, both national partners and global partners, have shared that the recession, may be impacting their planning, and they're not quite sure what that looks like, not only as it relates to their philanthropic investment, but also their employees' ability to volunteer, their travel. So I'm just curious from both of your perspectives, if you can share how that may be impacting your future planning and in general, what you've heard from some of your peers.
I definitely think it's impacting just even how people are approaching and thinking, just a year in advance, 2 years in advance. So far, there's not been any concrete changes in terms of the company I work for. We're still in a huge expansion mode, still hiring 40 people a week and setting up a couple new offices. We're much more of a regional company. So we're in Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona. We have done some international work, but not much in the last few years. So I think from a standpoint of impact and how it relates to the CSR role, and where it will impact, if it does, is the our RK Foundation. It's a small foundation, but we are actually funded by our scrap metal that we recycle, either from our shops. We have plumbing shops, pipe shops, and or when we replace equipment that we strip down and recycle. So right now, actually different than a lot of companies, the pandemic sort of helped us in terms of it made when you recycle metals, it's a commodity. So we have more money now than we did before because of the increase in the commodities. So I feel like it could impact probably the ability to do sort of these extra things that we like to do, if it's with employees or for employees, because a lot of what I end up doing on a day-to-day basis is employee engagement. And I do worry a little bit about our hardship fund that is employee funded. Maybe some people will stop maybe donating. So, but there's nothing been concrete about it, I think, because we're still in this growth mode and we have more work than we can handle at the moment. But I think it adds that worry. RK as a company, because construction is cyclical, they have diversified a lot. So with the intention that if one line of business slows as construction, then we can hopefully, cross train and absorb those employees in another line of business. So we'll see. We had one of our lines of business, mission critical, is we make data centers, modular data centers, and also cryptocurrency mining. So that's been very volatile recently. And so we've had to lay off some employees in that division because of some of our contracts got canceled by what's going on in the cryptocurrency. So that's just sort of a little bit all over the place, but I guess that kind of answers your question. So.
Yeah, and we are right in it right now. So we're a tech company. I'm sure you all have seen the news with social impact teams and just, tech companies and layoffs. So it's been a little bit of a scary time for sure, being in CSR in the tech industry. So I feel that question. I'm like right in the middle of all of these budget cuts. We've done 20% budget cuts across the company in order to avoid layoffs. And as you know, our budget is typically the one that is cut the deepest. So we almost have a 40% budget cut from last year to this year. And so, that impacts everything that we're doing, right? So one thing that we're thinking through is how does that impact the company as well? So yeah, our budget's cut and that hurts. But also when our budget's being cut, that means budgets across the company are being cut, which means that employees' capacity is probably going to be a little tight next year. There's going to be a lot of expectations to perform if we do let people go. So that has higher expectations. So when you ask around, like, what does that mean for employees? When we think about volunteering, we're like, okay, next year's not the year to volunteer, right? Like people are going to be really stressed. It's going to be hard to step away from work. We doubled down on volunteering in 2022, but maybe 2023 isn't the year to prioritize that. So maybe we focus on skills-based volunteering because you mentioned travel. I was so lucky to get to travel the world this year. Next year, we're having a no travel year. So that also impacts, like, we're so thankful that we had the foresight to hire program managers in each region. But now that we can't travel, like, what does that mean as well? So with the no traveling and the budget cuts, and I think we're going to switch to skills-based volunteering, which you can do that anywhere in the world. So skills-based volunteering is another trend. I think that is going to be huge next year because employees can partner with nonprofits, and I'll talk about the impact of that in a second. And that's such an easy way, and it's free, and it supports nonprofits and charities all over. So I think that's something that we'll use to navigate the budget cuts for sure. And then we'll also double down on our Tech for Good program. So like thinking through all of the stuff that costs us money, how can we still provide an avenue for employees to give back that doesn't cost us a lot of money, that's still serving employees, and we're serving nonprofits and not taking that away. So I think we're just going to have to get really creative. I know for our team, it's going to be a really scrappy and lean year, but also taking advantage of that to fix all of our processes, to come up with innovative new ways to do things, and like really have a focus on operational efficiency within our organization to like clean up everything that we need to clean up while still making impact, but it just might look a little different. And I think the most important thing about that is communicating to employees like what our top priorities are. So they're not like, you volunteered so much, why aren't you doing that next year? But if you're very transparent around like, hey, here as a social impact team, this is what we're focusing and diving deep on next year. They'll understand and buy into that versus being like, why aren't we volunteering? So I think that is something that we're doing to navigate that. And then for the nonprofit piece, I see Lakeisha's on the call. I'm also on Big Brothers Big Sisters Associate Board, but I feel for nonprofits that have corporate partners pulling. And I think this is where the trust-based philanthropy model really, really comes in. And it's so critical to not just give one-off donations every year, one-off grants, to have multiple year programs with nonprofits so they know that you're not going to pull that from them when there's a recession, right? And so one thing that we've done and been able to do this year is knowing that next year is going to be really tight. What I did is I redistributed, and I know this isn't possible for everyone, but I was able to say, you know what, in Q4, we're cutting all of our programming. We're not doing any programming, and we're going to use all of that funding to support nonprofits for the next year, because that will also fuel my programming for next year that I don't have to worry about, right? So we front loaded all of our grants for next year this year, and we're able to now use those strategic partnerships with nonprofits to fuel our programming and the volunteering efforts that we won't be able to pay for next year. So I think it's just like getting really creative, communicating to your employees that, hey, this year is going to be rough. And if your company is going through it, it's not just social impact, the entire organization likely is going through it. So yeah, I think it's just getting really scrappy too, and just utilizing your strengths. Like, we're a tech company. How can we use our product and our product knowledge to get back to nonprofits and mobilize our workforce to do that from their homes? If that answered, hopefully it did. Kind of all over the place.
That was great. Thank you both so much.
That's fabulous. I'm taking so many notes over here on so many critical things that you both are saying. I'm really excited to see how everybody leans into this next year and supports and uplifts our community together. So one question that I also got in there is, where do you start if you're relatively new to a large organization and you are on the CSR team, this person specifically, and community partnerships? And what are the most crucial things that she needs to know in terms of what already exists and is happening, and go for first steps? Which I know there's a few first steps.
Yeah, so, you know, I think with anything, it's how do you build the business case for it? How do you say, in terms of, you know, would be great to do this, it will, what's it going to do? What's the outcome going to be, and the impact, and is it measurable, and can you make it from the business case? So if you want to increase employee engagement, because it will then help with retention and building culture, and the sort of some of those that are a little harder to measure. So I think it's really that first step is being prepared, and there are studies and there's the data's out there if you wanted to do a proposal. So I think that's probably the most critical thing, because the C-suite and the owners, that's how they think. And that's how, you know, because obviously for employees to use their time or company resources or budgeting, you know, that all comes out of the bottom line and out of the profit. So it's really, to me, it's building that business case. And also I'm a big believer in copying other great ideas. So I think it's sort of being educated and aware and networking and learning about what other companies are doing, either in your industry or maybe not in your industry, and learning from maybe what was hard to start and what the lessons learned and things maybe to do and not to do, and borrowing those ideas. I think those are a couple ways of when I read that question, that's what came to mind, is how do you make it good for the business, and good for the business's main asset, which is generally their employees.
Yeah, I would echo that too. I think a business case is always the best starting point. And then I also think, and Katie mentioned this, like leadership buy-in is critical, especially when starting these programs. And so making sure that your executive team is bought into this idea. For us, we started with our board buy-in because we are a publicly traded company. So it started with a desire for us to really have a stronger proxy statement, which in its simplest form is what public-facing companies use to pitch to investors why they should continue to invest. But when it became increasingly important to our investors, that's when all of a sudden our C-suite team started listening up and being like, okay, we really need to pay attention to this. And that all ties into ESG, but our board was afraid that basically we were going to be overlooked by investors if we didn't start making these changes. So I think executive and board buy-in is really important. One thing, and I came into my company, I should have mentioned this in my intro. I started social impact at my company. So when I started, it really wasn't there. I reported, and that's a whole other conversation of who does CSR report to? At that time, I reported to the CEO, which has pros and cons. But it was his passion project at the time. And I essentially I had the buy-in from him, which was great, but I had to teach and educate, right, our company what social impact or CSR was. They didn't know what it was outside of volunteering. So they thought it was volunteering. So one thing that I did then, and I do now with my regional program managers, is survey. And I know survey fatigue is real. And I know you have to like do it in the right way and make sure it aligns with your company surveys and engagement surveys. But for us, that's been super helpful, because in that survey, when both of my regional program managers started, because we didn't have social impact in the region, I had them survey. And from that, you learn like what causes your employees care about, like what is the average tenure of your employee? Do they know what social impact is? Do they know what programs are currently existing? Do they know how to opt in? How often do they want to get involved? What type of events look like? What type of year is the best? Like all of those questions you can capture. And I thought that was so helpful for us when determining like what is CSR at Alteryx specifically, because we also had listening circles and provided employees avenues to give feedback directly. But that was a great starting point for us because I didn't want to build a program in a silo and not have the influence of our employees because it's for our employees, right? Like we want to be the voice of our employees. So that's a starting point that I use to kind of dig deeper and understand what our values are and our mission statement and all of that good stuff. But also think creating allies across the company is super, super critical too when you're starting a CSR program, because our teams are so small and scrappy. Our budgets are also really small, as I just mentioned. So making sure you have allies across the company that can help fund your projects and support, like our facilities managers, they have Together Tuesdays every month. So how can I connect with them to fund a volunteering event on a Together Tuesday that doesn't come from my budget? Or our marketing team, when we have our conferences with our customers, how can I partner with them to showcase our incredible nonprofit partners to elevate their mission while showing what our product can do to get back? So it's creating allies across the company too. That has been critical for me to supplement our smaller budget and teams as well. So those I think are really incredibly important.
That is fabulous. Laura, if you don't mind me asking, sometimes it's hard to get an entire survey dedicated to learning about the organization. If you had to prioritize 1 or 2 questions to really ask your employees, what would you ask them?
I think it depends on what stage you're in your social impact journey. For me, I think the most critical questions that we asked at the time that we did were causes, because we hear so many things from our employees, like, do we want to have a stance on gun violence, right? With all of these mass shootings that are going on. What is our stance on LGBTQIA issues, right? Like we have in ERG, but what does the company care about? So I think using data from these regional surveys to come back to our CEO to say, like, these are the hard facts. Your employees believe that you should be making a statement around these issues. I think that one has been critical. And I also think tenure for us at the time that we were in was critical. So we went from a company that was 1,500 employees and we almost doubled in size in 2 years. So all of the employees that we had at the time of the survey, all of them were within 2 years. So we had essentially a brand new company. And I think that was critical for us in our programming and how we showcase our CSR program. So instead of at all hands pretending like employees knew who we were, we needed to focus on education and awareness around our programs versus like engagement. So I think those 2 things at the time that we did them were critical, but it depends.
Those are fabulous. And then to also follow up on Lori's question for both of you, who do you report to and what department do you sit in currently?
So I used to be Department of One. Really how the CSR program at RK started was I just was in a different role, but I started doing, hey, let's do volunteer together. And then I had the interest in the foundation and being more involved with that. So then from there, I did a proposal to the owners of we should create this program because then naturally people start just coming to you. So created RK Cares and then have been slowly building more pieces and parts of it in terms of the employee opportunities and the opportunities for outreach with the employees. So now it's just been recently, I finally sort of pushed and said, I need to be with the HR team. So I work under the HR umbrella and that's been great. It's sort of work a lot with the learning and the talent development and recruiting and different things that fall under HR. So that's been a really nice change to have a different perspective and have other people that I can lean on and so we're at, I think, 1,800 employees total. And so it's still really me, but working in connection with our marketing team and the HR team. So kind of between both of those.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, when I first started my career, I reported directly to the CEO. Pros and cons for sure. Pro was I had direct access to our CEO, and I had direct access to funding, so I felt like that wasn't ever an issue. I had so much visibility in the organization. He was incredibly passionate about it, but I think that was also the con, is that he was incredibly passionate about it, and he was so hands-on and in the weeds. And I often felt like as a company, we hadn't defined what we stood for. So we are constantly chasing after his ideas of what we should focus on. So if something happened, and I'm blanking on a great example, but we would run towards it and do a campaign, and then we would run over here. So I felt like it was really confusing for employees of like, what is our mission? Like, what is our North Star? We have nothing except for we're chasing around his vision. So I think that was a big struggle for me from a strategy standpoint. Now we currently report into a chief people officer, which is a pretty new role actually to Alteryx. We had hired a chief people officer 2 years ago. Before that, we just had a VP of HR. And pros and cons about reporting into people and culture. Overall, I love it. And I think it makes sense in our organization. As Katie said, we have direct access to like learning and development, TA, and all of that. And I feel like they get what we do, and we don't have to explain what we do, which is really nice. We don't have employee experience. We're too small for that. So I kind of feel like our team, although we're CSR2, like we're really the culture carriers and we're employee experience and all of that into one team. The one downfall, and it wouldn't make sense for us to report into marketing. But the one downfall is I'm also a cause marketing person. I have no background in marketing, right? Like I've taught myself that we don't have any funding to hire someone in marketing on our team, and marketing for our company, product marketing, is so drastically different than marketing for what we do, right? So it's constantly a struggle to teach our marketing team how to market our efforts versus like very technical product marketing. So I think that is the one downfall, is that we have to do our own collateral and marketing, and storytelling, I think you all know, is very huge. So we've had to like upskill ourselves to be these storytellers versus relying on our marketing team. But as I mentioned, I don't know that since we're a tech company and product marketing, it would make sense. And we have their support, but that is a struggle for us.
Well, the good news is I think you're doing it the best I've ever seen. So with no marketing experience, I did not know that. So I'd like to transition a little bit. I know we've got some nonprofit partners on the line here, and we'd just love to hear from both of you. What does the good partner look like, and kind of just some experiences you've had around that? And folks, if you continue to have questions, feel free to send them to me via chat, or in the chat for everyone.
So I'll start. So I think a good partner is, for me, I like a partnership that has multiple levels to it. So it might be one that the RK Foundation funds, to give the monetary funding to for a program or operational costs. But then is there a way to get our employee engaged and our employees connected? So for example, one of the, our nonprofit partners is the Denver Public Schools and the Denver Public Schools Foundation. So while the organization gives from a financial standpoint through the foundation, our foundation, we also do employee volunteering and give back. And then they're doing some new initiatives with the DPS Foundation. So being involved in some of those meetings and that engagement piece there. And actually that's how I got to meet Olivia. And so it's been nice to, that she's on the CIVIC team now. So get to see her quite often. But I really think it's that sort of, there's multiple connection points. And I think too, for me, a good partner is something that it makes sense, and it's an authentic, from the standpoint of it makes sense for the company because of who the nonprofit is, but it's also, I think that it would make sense for us, when we do partnerships, we want it to be a local. So even if it's a national organization like the American Heart Association, we work with the local chapter, and we would do that here and in Utah, and now I do it in Arizona as well. So I think those kind of partnerships that have multiple touch points, levels, and engagements, I think are the best, and is something that's beneficial for both organizations.
Yeah, I would echo, and I think my points are going to be very, very similar to Katie. I think that multiple dimension is so critical. And so at our company, or at Alteryx, our purpose statement for our strategic grants is we believe in supporting the communities in which we live and work. And we focus our efforts on partnering with nonprofits based on their ability to serve underrepresented communities by filling in gaps within data literacy, forging career breakthroughs, creating positive social impact, and diversifying the workforce. So any nonprofit that we're looking for, like we have a process in place to evaluate that. And I think it's really important too, when we're thinking about a good nonprofit partner for our company, is not just that it serves my needs and social impact. Like, how can I make sure that the nonprofit we're serving can help our TA's efforts in recruiting diverse talents? How can I make sure that this nonprofit provides an avenue for our education team to get our product in the hands of more students around the world? So making sure that not only does it serve the needs of my team, but like, how can I make this spread out across the company and have them bought into the idea too? So like our product team, how can I get them, as Katie mentioned, volunteering? And that's one thing we look at too, is we don't want to, we try to give to nonprofits who we can have multiple touch points, as Katie said. So how can we provide this as an opportunity for our employees to volunteer? How can we introduce them to our product and have them upskill on their product or do technical volunteering with this company, skills-based volunteering? And then, leverage it as a pipeline to recruit diverse talent into our organization, which is what we have done. And I see Lakeisha's on the call. An example of that is Big Brothers Big Sisters. We had a career possibilities day where we were able to bring in students into our office and expose them to what a workplace looks like. And then our education team came in and they provided them scholarships. And then our early career team wants to stay in contact with them as they go into university. So I think it's making sure it touches multiple points across the company. Another thing too is, as Katie mentioned, so I'm kind of echoing everything she's saying, but mutually beneficial is critical, right? Like, I don't ever want to, I came from the nonprofit sector, so nonprofits have a very special place in my heart, and I never want to feel or be the company that's continuously taking and not giving. So it's critical for me to make sure, one, we're not asking too much from them. Like, we're plugging into initiatives that already are happening and making it easy, or if we want to create a new initiative, we're funding that. We're funding it fully from the people and the employees that are having to step away from their job and take on new stuff. And so making sure they're compensated for that versus having these high expectations and make them scramble. So I think the mutually beneficial part is critical, because I want to make sure they're getting just as much out of it, if not more, right, than we as a company are.
I love that, helping them to get more out of it than you get out of it. That's just fabulous to hear. To transition us a little bit more, I know there's always people interested in getting into this field, so I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on it, and if there's any advice you would really give someone as they explore this field or consider transitioning into it.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of opportunities and resources now, I think more than even a few years ago, for getting into this, simply because it has become a focus for a lot of companies, corporations, and that is there. And you'll see a lot more job listings, particularly DEI and ESG, but I think also there's just more opportunity in general. So I had done the CSR certification program that CIVIC does with CU and the Lead School of Business, and that was great for me. That helped me see the broader perspective of corporate citizenship beyond just that sort of philanthropy and volunteering part. So I think that was good. I think too, just taking advantage of the resources that are out there. So I subscribe to a lot of different things, like the Boston College Corporate Citizenship, ACCP, those different things that there's always learning opportunities, and hoping that next year I can actually do some more in-person type of learning opportunities. And I think, CIVIC has so many great programs. I'll put that out there, being on the programs committee, but it's a lot of it's networking, like it is with anything, figuring out which companies invest in this type of and put stock in this type, being a good corporate business and really finding out the different opportunities and or creating them. So that's what I did at RK. I was here in a different role, as I mentioned, and I think for me that's what worked. And I think it's similar for a lot of people in this industry. We were there being the doers, and then, hey, this is sort of taking my passions of what I like to do and making a career out of it. So I just try to take advantage of any learning opportunities that I have, and being involved in something like CIVIC has been really critical for me.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, this is my first role in CSR, and I had no like official CSR experience. The good news is, as you all have heard in all the communications, like now is the time for career changers to thrive, right? Like we have this huge focus on career changers, and we have a huge focus on like non-traditional career paths, and companies and industries want that non-traditional experience, right? So like now is your time to get into CSR. When I was originally applying for Alteryx, was applying for a learning and development position because that was what my master's was in. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And the whole time I was talking, subconsciously, I was talking about my passion for giving back to the community and my passion for creating inclusive cultures within companies and my passion for employee engagement. And so I mentioned that because even if you find your dream company, but it might not exactly be the perfect social impact role that you want, take that interview, right? Like take that interview and be authentic to yourself and share what your passions are. And I know my case is unique and I have privilege in that it ended up getting me a full-time job, but I share that to encourage you to, no matter if it's not the perfect job, just like speak your truth during those interviews and know that whatever skill set you have, whether it's nonprofit relationships or program management or project management or cause marketing, whatever it is, you can market yourself in all of those we need within our field. So it's not like you can go and get this like perfect master's degree. Maybe you can, I don't know. And social impact, like we're all scrappy individuals who are so passionate about this, and you probably have the skill set. Just connect that with what you're currently doing and how connect all of your program management to impact metrics, right? So it's just like tweaking the way that you leverage your current skills to tie it to maybe employee culture versus like the actual impact of whatever program you did. So just know that, use your skill set and tie it back to how it impacts the employees and the community. And then I think I read somewhere, I'm going to totally butcher this metric, but Adam Grant or someone super wise had something to say about like 90% of the job you can teach. It might have been 98, it might have been 94, but I fully believe in that. And I think I'm a good example of that. Like I didn't have official experience, but you can be taught how to do the stuff that you need to do, right? So I think that's something too, is just like keep applying for those jobs, use it as practice. And then as Katie mentioned, networking has been the most critical thing, I think, in my career and the reason I've upskilled so fast. So there are so many different ways you can network. CIVIC is obviously the most fantastic way. I've met so many incredible professionals in this industry that have become my mentors and have been my allies and taught me so many different things. So find avenues to network and continue to reach out to people. If you see someone doing something cool on LinkedIn, send them a message and ask to meet them for 30 minutes. Like just chat with them. You don't have to have an official agenda, or you can if that makes you feel more comfortable, but don't be afraid to reach out to people. I know I've reached out to people all the time on LinkedIn. People have reached out to me, and it's a great way to learn new trends and network in the industry. And then I had one thing I wrote down when Katie was talking. Education obviously is great too. So I ended up doing the University of Penn's executive program in social impact. So that was really fantastic for me because it focused on creating a strategy within an organization for social impact. So as Katie mentioned, the business case, if you're there in your journey, I highly encourage you to check it out. And if you're interested in that program, happy to share more about it. But that was a great opportunity to connect with tech industries and social impact. So like Twilio, Salesforce, Okta, like all of them were attending this. So it was great for me to get to know them. And then on that same note, if you are in the tech industry and in social impact or wanting to get into social impact, there's this coalition called Impact Cloud. And that also, we have a Slack channel. I think Social Impact World, if you haven't followed them on LinkedIn, they have a Slack channel, but find these different, and if you want to get involved with either of those, ping me on LinkedIn and I'll invite you. Social Impact World, I think, has like almost 1,000 people, and there's like different like crisis response, DEI. I want to create a volunteering time off policy. Do you all have an example? Like all of that has been so critical. And Social Impact World also does weekly coffee chats. So it's an opportunity. They pair you with someone random and you can connect with them. So networking, I think, is critical. Continuing to put yourself out there and apply for those jobs, I think, is critical, and know that you can upskill yourself and just keep surrounding yourself with people that can mentor you and learn that you can learn from, and utilize the skill set that you do have, because it's probably so valuable.
So much great wisdom there. And I'll also say that the University of Colorado CSR certification course does still have spots available for starting January 2023. And at CIVIC, we also do offer a partial scholarship to those that will help diversify and expand access to it. So we'll make sure to include all of those great links in the follow-up recap. And over to the final question, I'm going to toss it over to Tara. That's a great one. No pressure.
Well, I would like to just echo Lori and Katie. I got into the CSR field because I got my start in communications. So I'd been a communications professional. And of course, one of the things when you're doing comms and PR is, how do you build reputation? And so it wove into this, it was, community volunteerism, and then corporate social responsibility, and now it's ESG. But I think, now 20 years later, I don't know when I'm wearing the CSR hat and the communications hat. And I feel like the companies I've worked for have just kind of almost taken advantage of that and been like, you can do both. And so I guess my question in a roundabout way is talking a little bit more about how you work with your communications teams. And I know, Laura, you mentioned a lot of it, you're doing it all. But, Katie, maybe you have more to add, or maybe there's more. Is it marketing and communications, or just communications? And I know there's also a lot of comms that goes on between HR.
Yeah, I work pretty closely with our marketing. I'm kind of more feeding information to them about here's what we did, or things that will go on our social media and kind of tell our stories. I do sometimes. So the way we're set up is our marketing also does it's marketing and comms, and they also do our proposals. So if we want to get bids, and we're often part of the bid for a project, so they do that as well. It's kind of a subset of our marketing and comms team. But I work with them in terms of so right now we're doing a campaign to increase our donors for our hardship fund, for employee hardship fund. So, here's the idea. How can we do this? We're filming some small videos of donors, and then we're going to do ones of recipients. So I kind of work with them on that piece of building out the hey, I've had this idea. How can we make it work across the whole enterprise? So that's how I work with more directly. But then a lot of times, if you look at our Friday newsletter that goes out, it's things that we've done with our K Cares and or employee engagement, or I'll put in different opportunities for people just to get involved in their community, those kind of things. It's sort of feeding them that. And then, but they do help quite a bit in terms of utilizing the information and either working on the website or social media, or just different ways to communicate to employees. And I do, as you said, Tara, a lot of times it's for a while I just kind of like jokingly called myself the catch-all, because you suddenly are doing it all, and it's like, hey, let's do employee engagement, let's do a happy hour. I'm like, it's not really what it's all about. But so yeah, you do tend to wear a lot of hats, and I'm getting better at saying, well, that's not really within my scope. I'd like to work on things that are more impactful. So it's also teaches you to really sort of better define. And I love, Lori, what you mean, your elevator speech of your, focus area and that was perfect, because so often you have to try to explain all these things you do and what works and what doesn't fall under your area or your focus areas. So that's sort of how I work with our team, and it has worked. And sometimes I lean on them more than others, and sometimes oftentimes I'm writing the submissions, but it just kind of works that way. So lucky in that respect, I know.
I feel the catch-all phrase like to my core, because I'm like, am I an internal marketer today, or am I cause marketing? Am I a program man? Like, what is my hat today? But I feel the intertwinedness, that's not a word, between comms and CSR, because I think in the beginning, and I'm thinking back to 2020, just because that was such a pivotal year. And it was really the catalyst for us growing our team. And we were so intertwined with internal comms. Like, I truly felt like our internal comms person was an extension of our team. And looking back, I'm like, bless you, Emily, for putting up with all of that. She had pretty much 2 full-time jobs. And I think the reason it was so confusing and we brought her in so much is, to my previous point, is we didn't know who we were as a company. We didn't know what we stood for. We didn't know what causes we're going to speak out on. We didn't know our CEO's positioning and how to make a political statement, right? Like, all of these things we hadn't defined on our side. And so then it caused us to pull in internal comms to be like, help us, like, you all define this. And then they're like, well, you all should, it was just a back and forth. So I think the more that social impact teams can define who they are, define their North Star, define like what they stand for, like create a purpose document and share that with comms, then it's like, okay, this is when we need to loop in social impact, and vice versa. Like, this is when we need to loop in internal comms. I think that helps so much. And as I mentioned earlier, we're right in the middle of this like crisis comms versus social justice response. And we're having to really articulate on our side, like, in my opinion, crisis comms is totally different than social justice responses. Can they overlap? For sure. I think it's like the war in Ukraine. For us, because we had employees in Kyiv, we had to automatically worry about their safety and all of this, but we also wanted to show our support for the war in Ukraine. So I think there can be overlaps, but making sure you clearly articulate everything. One thing also that we have done too is we presented to our chief marketing officer why social impact should be a core pillar in our go-to-market brand strategy. So even though we're a product company, we always say sorry if you can hear dogs, the FedEx is here, but we're people first, and we say that all the time. So we presented why we think that all of our internal efforts should be a core pillar when we're talking to customers. Like, we care about the environment, like we're an inclusive organization, and communicating that. And I also think that helps to them know how to talk about our efforts. So it's like educating basically and teaching the comms team how to talk about you and how to talk about their efforts versus you constantly having to, I know some of the time in the past, we would have to constantly like, well, you're talking about it in the wrong way, or, writing stuff ourselves, which, don't get me wrong, we still have to do all the time, but it's like the more we can empower and educate different teams across the org, and it's not just comms, it's all different teams on what we do, the more empowered they'll feel to write about it and share it. And then to Katie's point too, like connecting with our employee brand person who runs our social media links and getting them all the information. So it's just creating an avenue and a process to get out all of your information. So like an internal comms strategy and a social media strategy, like we have strategies all over the place that are getting out our messaging, because we know the success of our program is only as impactful if people are aware about it and they know how to plug in. So it's communicating the impact of what we do both internally and externally, and making sure our comms team feels confident in sharing that too.
That is beyond fabulous. I love that you said only impactful if people are aware, and that is truly what you two have done for us, has made us aware of so many core CSR pillars and different opportunities. And I know that this has been a very uplifting hour for me, and I hope each of our attendees felt that same way. So I just want to say thank you all for joining us today, and huge thank you to Lori and Katie for all of your great wisdom and everything you shared. As a reminder, we'll send a wrap-up email next week, which will include resources mentioned, as well as the recording, because I know I was taking copious notes, and I even need to go back and get a few more from it. And of course, we have one more great event before the year ends. We'll host the CSR Peer Roundtable on December 15th. And then we'll kick off the new year on January 12th with a networking happy hour as well. So just want to say thank you all for joining us and spending your Thursday afternoon with CIVIC. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, everyone.
Bye, all.
Very much. Bye, everyone. Thank you.